Story 1. My name is Jason, and I was in 7th grade when this happened. I went to a tiny middle school called Cedar Grove in the sleepy town of Bridgeton. Nothing too dramatic ever went down there, so I'd never been in any kind of dangerous situation at school before that day. It started out normal enough. I got to my second period English class with Mr. Andrews, and it was the usual boring lecture and reading examples from the textbook. English was one of my least favorite classes, since I found it so dull. Anyway, we were all sitting there quietly reading a sample essay when the loudspeaker suddenly beeped loudly and came on. The voice said, "We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill." Everyone exchanged confused and nervous glances. Like I said, I never expected anything big to happen at our quiet little school, so hearing we were in actual lockdown was shocking. It made me wonder what could be going on. After a few seconds of silence, Mr. Andrews jumped into action and told us all to line up along the wall by the door. He rushed to lock the door and turn off the lights, but I guess the power cut out before he could flip the switch. A couple of the girls in class started sniffling and crying softly. I didn't blame them. It was a stressful situation. I'd say about 10 tense minutes of silence went by when we suddenly heard running footsteps go past in the hall. When they reached our room, the footsteps stopped short. I could feel the whole class holding our breath, waiting and straining to listen. Then a boy started desperately banging on the door, begging to be let in. I was terrified because he sounded young, and I looked over at Mr. Andrews, who seemed just as freaked out as the rest of us. He hesitantly got up and went to the door, peeking out the little window. After a second, he quickly unlocked it and let the boy in. I recognized him from seeing him around school, but we'd never had classes together. Mr. Andrews asked if he was okay and told him to sit with the rest of us against the wall. Once we were settled again, I leaned over and whispered, asking what happened. The boy, who said his name was Tyler, told me he'd been in the bathroom where the lockdown started. He stayed in there for a while until some middle-aged man barged in and started banging on all the stall doors. When he got to Tyler's stall, Tyler crawled under to the next stall and made a break for it. Luckily, the guy only chased him a short way before giving up. I felt a chill go down my spine as the reality of the situation sank in. This was real. We were in danger from some violent intruder. Not even a full minute later, we clearly heard heavy footsteps approaching our classroom door. Some of the other kids were trying to muffle their crying and sniffling as a loud bang echoed through the room, presumably from someone trying to get in. Seconds later, 2 or 3 more sets of footsteps ran up, and I could hear muffled voices as the group talked outside. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but knowing it was a gang of intruders made my stomach drop. I looked over at Mr. Andrews, who was trying to comfort a crying girl, but he seemed totally freaked out too. Suddenly, we heard yelling outside, and the footsteps took off running again. I guess the police had finally arrived. A wave of relief passed through the classroom. We stayed there silently for what felt like forever, but was probably only another 20 minutes before we finally got the all-clear announcement. Later, we were told a group of men had shown up claiming to be there to pick up their kids from class. Obviously, none of them were actual parents, so things escalated quickly when they forced their way inside past the front office staff. We weren't given many more details, but it was definitely an experience I'll never forget. I have never been so terrified in my life as when it seemed like violent intruders might break into our classroom at any moment. We all felt so powerless, like sitting ducks. And poor Tyler was traumatized from his encounter with the man in the bathroom. He didn't come back to school for a couple weeks. When I got home and told my parents what happened, they were shocked. We live in such a small, quiet town where things like that just don't happen. My dad wanted to pull me out of school for the rest of the year, he was so rattled. But I convinced him I'd be okay after some time had passed. Still, we all looked at our home and town differently after that day. We realized you can never fully predict or prevent random violence. For weeks, I had nightmares about being trapped in a classroom or bathroom while a crazed gunman tried to get in. I'd wake up in a sweat, heart racing. During the day at school, I found myself constantly dancing around and tensing up whenever I heard loud sounds like books slamming or chairs scraping. It took a long time before I could relax at school again and not feel on edge. Story 2. This crazy situation happened to me about 2 years ago when I was working retail. I know most people will never experience a real lockdown, and if they do, it's usually at a school. But this went down during my closing shift at the big box store where I worked in the suburbs of Chicago. At the time, I was living in Des Plaines and working at the Target there. It started out as a pretty normal day. I typically worked closing shifts because of my class schedule, so I get out around 10 p.m. Around 4 p.m., my coworkers started showing me news stories about riots breaking out downtown in the city. This was due to a recent controversial police incident. The rioters were going nuts, breaking into stores, trashing everything, even beating up employees. I wasn't totally sure why they were taking it out on the stores, but it was intense. By 6 p.m., the riots were gaining steam, with thousands of people participating and hundreds of stores being looted or destroyed. There was even talk of the riots spreading out to the nearby suburban areas. I definitely kept my eyes open and watched the customers closely to make sure I was prepared for anything crazy to pop off in our store too. Another 2 hours went by, and at this point, it looked like the whole city was erupting in flames. Some of my coworkers actually left early because they were so freaked out. My manager, Dan, was super understanding though, and since we didn't have many customers coming in anyway, he let people take off if they wanted. I chose to stay since I needed the money and wasn't too worried myself. Turns out that was a mistake. I was stocking some canned goods in an aisle near the back of the store, opposite the main entrance, when I suddenly heard yelling outside. I went to the front of the aisle so I could see the windows facing the parking lot. There were people running around out there, but the glare made it hard to see exactly what was happening. As I started making my way toward the front to get a better look, the intercom crackled on, and I heard Dan announce that the store was now in lockdown. He told everyone to immediately get to the back stockroom. Against my better judgment, my curiosity got the best of me first. I moved a little closer to the entrance so I could see out the front doors, which I now realized had been locked. There were 10 or 15 people out there banging on the windows and trying to smash their way inside. It was one of the most insane things I've ever witnessed. I turned and sprinted toward the back stockroom, noticing other employees and the few remaining customers doing the same. When I got there, I saw Dan ushering everyone into the large walk-in refrigerated room where we kept produce and meat. For anyone who hasn't worked in a grocery store, these refrigerated rooms are basically giant insulated boxes with huge metal doors and plastic strip curtains at the entrances to maintain the temperature inside. Once I hustled in, Dan sealed the door shut and locked it from the inside. I felt reasonably safe in there, knowing it would be nearly impossible for rioters to break in without power tools or something. But I was scared about how long we might need to stay locked inside. If a huge mob camped out front, we could be trapped for hours. There were probably 30 to 40 people crammed in there with me, and many were freaking out big time, asking Dan if the door would really hold. The sounds of shattering glass, stuff crashing down, yelling and screaming drifted back to us. Hearing the full-on chaos and destruction happening on the other side of the wall was straight up terrifying. My whole body shook as the rioters rampaged closer and closer toward the back stockroom area. Soon their footsteps were right outside the door, then a few seconds of silence before the metal door rattled violently as someone tried to get in. Realizing it was locked, they began shouting and banging, demanding we open up. We all stayed dead quiet, but some of the customers were sobbing in fear. The noise outside swelled as more rioters joined in screaming and hammering on the door. One even yelled, "This is the police, open up," trying to trick us. This went on for a good 15 minutes of constant banging and shrieking threats before it slowly died down. Over the next half hour, the noise tapered off as the mob lost interest and moved on to trash other parts of the store. Nearly an hour passed before the police finally cleared the building and came to let us out. Stepping back into the store, the place was utterly destroyed. Shelves pushed over, products scattered all across the floors. It looked like a war zone. Anyway, from what I heard, the violence in the suburbs died down overnight. though it continued raging in the city proper for a few more days. Easily the most terrifying situation I've ever found myself in. But thankfully everyone in our store got through it unharmed. Story 3. This crazy situation went down during my sophomore year of high school. I should mention that I went to a huge public school called Central High that was known for having one of the biggest student bodies in the country. Every classroom in the school was full of students, and along with the teachers, there were about 5,000 people in the building on any given day. So when this lockdown happened, the scale of it was just massive. The day started out normal enough. I had all my usual morning classes, ate lunch, and was partway through my afternoon schedule. I was in physics working on a project outside. I asked the teacher if I could run back in to use the bathroom real quick. The bathroom was right by the side entrance door, so I zipped in and did my business. As I was washing my hands, this tall older guy in a grey hoodie came into the bathroom. He looked at me kinda creepy, not saying anything, and went into the far back stall. I dried my hands quick and got out of there. It seemed weird that he was dressed like that since any adult had to be faculty, but I didn't recognize him at all. Then again, in a school that big, I only knew a fraction of the staff. Still, something felt off about that guy. Anyway, I went back outside and worked on the project until our teacher brought us all back into the building about 15 minutes later. We had to walk pretty far since our classroom was in the back corner of the school, while the project area was closer to the front entrance and parking lot. Just as our whole class got inside and started heading down the hall, the loudspeaker suddenly crackled on. The principal announced that the entire school was now in lockdown. We all looked at each other confused, but our teacher rushed us toward the classroom while staying quiet. About halfway there, another teacher poked his head out and waved us into his room since it was bigger and had space. We hurried in and sat lined up along the wall, whispering nervously while the teachers talked about what could be happening. The whole time, I kept thinking about that creepy guy I'd seen in the bathroom. I had a gut feeling he had something to do with this lockdown. Just picturing being so close to him in there gave me chills. We'd only been sitting there silently for a few minutes when we heard quiet tapping on the window. Both teachers gestured for us to stay quiet as the tapping continued. Then we heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down the hall toward our classroom door. There was a pause, and a man's voice yelled out aggressively, "It's okay. I know there's a lot of you in there. Just open up the door for me." I felt true panic set in, and most of the class was crying now. The guy could obviously hear how many of us were in the room. He started slamming on the door and screaming horrific things, threatening to kill us if we didn't let him in. It sounded like he had a hammer or pipe. Each blow made us flinch. This went on for over a minute before we heard the other man outside the window yell for him to stop, and that they had to leave immediately. Police sirens echoed from the front lot, but the psycho kept pounding and yelling for another 30 seconds before finally giving up. We heard him sprinting back up the hall. Apparently the cops caught him trying to escape, but they never found the second guy from the window. When they released the man's photo after arresting him, I didn't recognize him at all. To this day, I believe the creep from the bathroom was the other one who got away. The theory was they were trying to rob the school, maybe to steal tech supplies from the science labs. But that was never proven, so the real motive remains a mystery. All I know is it was the most terrifying experience of my young life. Just the thought of what could have happened if they'd gotten inside the classroom still gives me panic attacks. Afterwards, security was amped up to the max. They installed metal detectors and security guards patrolled the halls. Many parents pulled their kids out and enrollment dropped that year. It really changed the whole vibe of the school, from a lively social hub to more of a prison feel. I had chronic nightmares reliving the event, always ending with the man bursting in and attacking us because I couldn't wake up in time. I found myself constantly on edge and vigilant, looking for potential threats everywhere. Dropping pencils made me jump out of my seat. It took therapy and a lot of time to process the trauma. But in a strange way, enduring that horror when I was so young shaped me for the better. I learned I could stay calm under intense pressure and terror. My empathy for others' suffering grew tremendously. Ultimately, the experience made me value my life and loved ones that much more, knowing in a split second it could all be taken away.